Hey there, Lori Lordson here with LL Counseling and Wellness, holistic addiction, trauma, and yoga therapy. Wanted to talk to you a little bit about addiction. This is my addiction series talking about different skills and tools and education for addiction recovery. So today I want to talk to you a little bit about triggers. We're going to back up and talk a little bit about how the brain gets addicted and the what I like to call the 1 minute brain model of addiction and how that relates to triggers. And if my computer cooperates correctly, I will also share my screen with you so you have another visual other than me. So as human beings, we tend to want to seek pleasure and avoid pain, right? So it's natural, and we've been using substances since the dawn of time. It's when we have certain genetic components, and when we use on a regular basis, it can change our brain chemistry, and that's how we end up developing an addiction. So I'm going to show you a visual and talk about this brain model. So this is just a lovely little picture of the brain so that we can think about these two parts. When we use on a regular basis, hopefully you can still see me well enough because I'm going to talk with my hands. We have our normal baseline or homeostasis, our normal, if you will. Some of us start at a lower, kind of more depleted level of those feel-good chemicals. And a lot of times that's what creates that desire to use substances to kick us up into a little bit of a higher place so that we have that nice feel-good state going on. So as we do that on a regular basis, our brain starts to think, oh, well, I don't have to produce these as much anymore because you're doing it artificially, right? And that's where that tolerance and the withdrawal comes in, is because we're constantly chasing that high, right? That's the physical chemical piece of what happens when we become addicted. And this is a very cursory example of the brain, right? Without all of the things explained. But just for our purposes, while there's many parts of the brain, we're going to talk about the two main pieces here when it comes to addiction recovery. So we have the lower brain of the limbic system, which is where the emotional centers live, right? All up in this space right here. And then we have the higher brain, or the executive functioning, the logical part of the brain. So what happens is this lower brain, that's where the survival, the emotional centers, right? The fight, flight, or freeze centers starts to hijack the higher brain because the brain thinks that we need those substances to survive, right? That's what happens, is we need the substances to survive, to get back to that baseline, that homeostasis. Um, so that's what happens in the brain. And then in order to shift that, right, we have to bring it back into balance. We have to bring that executive functioning back into our sphere. So I'm going to stop sharing for just a moment so that you can maybe see another visual. So if you look at my fist here, this is the lower brain, the limbic system, right? The higher brain is kind of on top of it. And what happens is that the lower brain blows the lid off the higher brain. So there's not a whole lot. Once you pick up, there's not a whole lot of logic happening there. It's all instinct. It's all that I need it and I need it now. So some of you can probably relate to what that feels like. And that's what happens. So we're going to look at the trigger system and how we can start to turn that around. So looking at triggers, right? Triggers are people, places, things, objects, times, feelings, emotions that cause cravings to use the substance. So when you have made a decision to stop using and you have triggers, this is what causes cravings and makes you more likely to pick back up again. So I gave you a really simple example, but before we talk about that, we're going to talk about the different types of triggers. So there's two types of triggers, and this comes from the matrix model of addiction recovery. It's an evidence-based practice for outpatient therapy. So I pull from a lot of different things, and this is one of the ones that I really like the explanation. So I'm sharing that with you, of course, with some of my flares and ideas in it. So two different types of triggers. We have the external, right, outside of us, which is the people, places, things. And then we have the internal or the emotions, the feelings. So if we have if somebody upsets us, then that would be more of an internal, right? What is the feeling that I'm experiencing right now? Or if I'm feeling anxious or scared, right? Then I want to feel different. And that might be the trigger. So we have what's called this trigger thought craving use pattern. Most of us think that, I'm triggered and all of a sudden I pick up, right? But there's a whole process that goes along with this. So I wanted to highlight that a little bit for you. So this is a super simple example, and I'm sure you could think of your own, and certainly you're welcome to reach out to me if you need a little help with this, and I can help you figure out some of these pieces if it doesn't fully make sense to you. So an example would be seeing someone drinking. You see someone drinking, that's the trigger, right? That's an external trigger. And then the thought might be, man, that really looks good. I wish I could do that. Maybe I can have just one, right? One won't hurt. Or, man, I'm not normal if I can't do that. Can I really never drink again? What's wrong with me? Right? This whole, what I like to call the mental snowball that happens when we have one negative thought that turns into another negative thought that turns into another negative thought. And the more we have those thoughts, the more likely it leads to craving. So the more we think about drinking and using, it leads to that craving. And craving a lot of times is physical, right? So you might taste it in your mouth. You might have tightness in your gut. You might even feel a little buzz or get kind of excited or stimulated or warmth in your body. And if this triggers you, definitely we want to use some breathing techniques or some other techniques to help manage that and reach out for help if it does, even just talking about it. So the closer you get to that craving space, the more likely you are to pick up. And then when you pick up, this cycle begins again, right? We have the drink and then you have 3, 4, 12, however many more, and then the cycle of consequences for you show up. So that's problems in relationships, the financial pieces, the dangerousness pieces, feeling bad about yourself, right? That mental snowball comes back around, and that guilt and shame shows up, which is going to make you more likely to pick up again. Okay. So I hope that this helped you to understand a little bit more of that process. And we can do that for lots of different things. One of the biggest reasons that people relapse is negative emotions, right? So those internal triggers. So if I'm thinking about something that happened to me, an old wound from the past, then I might think thoughts of I'm always going to feel this way. It's never going to get better, or I don't want to feel this way. I'm so overwhelmed. I need something to change the way I feel right now, which can lead to craving, which can lead to use. So that's a big example, and that's a lot of what I see in my practice. A lot of my clients also have unresolved trauma that leads to that relapse cycle, and really digging into that guilt and shame is a big part of that. So this is the explanation of triggers. And in the next video, we'll talk a little bit more about what do we do with it, right? What are some of the things, the quick ways that we can shift if we're in that space, right? And the earlier we interrupt that, the better. With the trigger thought craving use pattern, when we identify it at a trigger or we identify it in that first or second thought, then we can shift it with what's called thought stopping or doing something different, which I'll get more into in the next video. Because the closer we get to craving, the harder it is. It's not impossible, but the harder it is. And frankly, you might not be able to control picking up that first drink or drug, but all along that process, the more we bring the unconscious conscious, right? Bring it from that lower brain, the limbic system, to the higher brain, the more we have the opportunity to shift it. So when you're aware of your triggers, when you're aware of your thoughts, then you can interrupt it earlier. If you allow yourself to continue thinking about drinking or using, then that craving will continue. If you interrupt it, it's not going to last more than 10 or 15 minutes at the most. But think about this, and I want to leave you with this statement. The more you know, the easier this is going to be. If you allow yourself to continue thinking about drinking and using, you're choosing to start a relapse. There's a lot of things that you don't have control over. A lot of things that get in the way of being sober. However, allowing yourself to continue to think about drinking or using is choosing to start a relapse. Now, if that happens, then we don't beat ourselves up, right? We pick ourselves up, we get the help that we need, and we figure it out, and then we learn what was missing, right? What are the things that weren't working? What are the things that you might still need to work on so that you can stay sober long term if that's your goal? I hope this was helpful for you and that you learned a little something. Please feel free to comment, to ask questions, and reach out to me for a consultation if you need a little more support. Thank you so much for watching.